Hi everyone, so today we are going to look at extended mark questions in social psychology, and in particular we're going to be having a look at 8 mark questions and how to answer them on ethical guidelines. Just a couple of tips, really important tips when you do plan an 8 mark question. The majority of 8 mark questions in the exam will involve AO1 marks, which are description, and also AO3 marks, which are evaluation marks. So always bear this in mind, regardless of the wording of the question. Okay, so if the question is asking you to evaluate, there will always be AO1 descriptive marks as well. Okay, so your answer does need to be balanced, okay, rather than just evaluation. So always remember that. Your evaluative AO3 points will normally be a lot more detail, so they'll require a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail than the AO1 descriptive points. It is very important when you are evaluating theories to use examples of supporting studies. And I find that students do struggle with trying to remember some of the supporting studies. So do try to make a bit more conscious effort to try and learn some of these supporting studies, because it will make a big difference in the exam. And really, lastly, always produce a plan, even if it takes you 1 or 2 minutes in your exam. It's always worth doing a plan, as it just keeps your answer a lot more structured. Because sometimes when we write an extended mark question, I think students do have a habit of sort of going off topic. Therefore, if you plan in the right way, you will stay more focused on the question. Okay. So, just a couple of background knowledge pointers really that we're going to be looking at for the question. So the question that I've chosen to plan and have a go looking at is on ethical guidelines. So some background reading and knowledge really for you to revise before you have a go at even planning and writing this answer. I would revise over the following. So ethical guidelines. Remember, ethical guidelines are guidelines that have been put into place by the BPS, the British Psychological Society, okay, to ensure research using humans is conducted appropriately. So informed consent obviously needs to be gained, deception, right to withdraw, protection, confidentiality. So make sure you have a good understanding and knowledge of what these guidelines actually are. And also do have a look back at some of the studies that you looked at in social psychology, just to remind yourself, because you will need all of this knowledge for the question that we're going to be having a look at next. Okay, so if you're not sure, then pause, go back to your social revise that area, and then come back and look at the question that we're going to have a look at. Okay. So the question that we're going to have a look at is: evaluate the ethical considerations of research within social psychology, for 8 marks. Now this is an exam question which is taken from a past paper, so it's a real exam question which was on an AS psychology exam paper for Edexcel. Okay, now the reason why I've highlighted evaluate, as I was talking about it earlier, evaluate is in the question for 8 marks. However, it's not 8 marks AO3, okay? It's divided up into AO1 and AO3, okay? So really, the first thing we need to do is break down this question, really put it into our own words and understand what it's actually asking us to do. So what it's really asking you to do is to use all the research in social psychology, including all your research and studies, all your main studies, even supporting studies, and discuss whether social psychology as a whole considers ethical guidelines within their research. In other words, do some of the studies that you've looked at in social psychology, do they follow guidelines, ethical guidelines, or do they violate them? In other words, do they not follow them? Okay, so that is what the question is asking you to do. Now, on the next slide, I have produced a plan already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the plan. and really show you what kind of things you would write and how you would structure your answer. Okay, so I've written quite a little bit of detail in the plan. So firstly, I'm going to be looking at, I've drawn up a table for my plan. So I've got AO1 descriptive on one side and I've got AO3 evaluation on the other. So firstly, let's have a look at the description, what we would include in this answer. Firstly, you would start off by actually going through what are ethical guidelines and why they are used. And very briefly, I don't want a whole paragraph on this, okay, but just say what the ethical guidelines are and why they are important. Then you would go on to actually identify some of the guidelines that were obviously listed here, such as informed consent, deception, right to withdraw, protection, confidentiality. Okay, if you're not sure about these, then go back and look through them yourselves again. Okay, so really for AO1, you're describing what these are. Okay, you don't have to write about all of them. Obviously, choose a few and just write about them, explain what they are and how you would obviously use them in research. So for example, if we were talking about right to withdraw, for example, you would describe it as all participants in a research study should have the right to withdraw from a study at any point. Okay, so you're just describing what the guideline is. That's all you're doing. For 4 marks there, all of that would include. Okay. Moving on to the AO3 evaluation. So these are obviously evaluations a bit more detailed. So remember, they are more in depth. They really test your knowledge, okay, and your evaluation skills. So you'd start off by using some examples, and this is where you need your research and studies from social psychology. So use examples of studies now that either go against or follow the guidelines. So some of the studies that you might have looked at within social psychology are Milgram, Sharif and Berger, and obviously there are a few others which you might have studied. So choose a couple of studies that you can focus on rather than loads of studies. Okay. Now, because it's a question about ethics, a Milgram is an essential. It's a must. Okay, so you've got to talk about Milgram. It's one of the most controversial, most popular studies in psychology. So you know, in terms of ethics, so it's very important to talk about Milgram in this answer. So you'd start off by the example I've used is from Milgram. So I've chosen Milgram. So Milgram's study did not obtain informed consent from his participants as they were told it was a study on the effects of punishment on memory. Okay, so I'm saying obviously how he didn't follow that guideline. However, although he violated the ethical code of conduct, it can be argued that his study would have no validity if he had told his participants the true aims. Okay, so if you look at the detail that I've put into that point, that is the level of detail that you will need, okay, per point for an AO3 mark. Okay, so what you're doing is you're applying the ethical guideline to the study and then you're describing it. Okay, also you need to explain how following or violating that particular guideline did affect the study. So if you look back at my previous point about Milgram, I've said that it would have affected the validity of the study. Okay, because obviously if he had told them the true aim, then I guess the study would have been pointless. Okay, so there you have it. Really, that's a plan for that 8 mark question on ethics. Okay, so using all your research from social psychology, okay, have a go at planning and answering that question.